Hey everyone, today we're going to solve absolute value equations. I know that all of you have been waiting really patiently for this section, so let's just go ahead and dive right on in. First thing, what is absolute value? Well, when I've told students in the past that's a magnitude of a number, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So let's define it this way. Absolute value is the distance away from zero on a number line. Now let's think about this. There's one thing that a lot of my students always told me they knew about absolute value, and they said that it was always positive. Well, it is, but now we know why, because distance is always positive. Okay, you wouldn't say, if you went to work and you went 5 miles and then you went back home 5 miles, you wouldn't say, hey, when I left work and went home, I went negative 5 miles today. No. You would say positive. So distance is always positive, and that's why absolute value is always positive. Rewrite the absolute value equation as two linear equations. Do not solve. Okay, well, let's think about this. Let's think of an easier problem here. If I had asked you, and you do not have to write this part down unless you want to, the absolute value of what is 15? Okay, well, absolute value means it's always going to be positive. So in here, we could say if this was 15, the absolute value of 15 is 15, so 15 works. We also could substitute in negative 15, because the absolute value of negative 15 is 15, because it's always positive. So let's think about this. So this must mean we're going to have a positive and a negative inside the absolute value symbols. Okay? So, well, we don't have an easy problem like this one. And you know why? Because they're too easy. You guys are better than that. So that's why we gave you 6x minus 3 in absolute values. But the same difference. There's going to be a positive and there's going to be a negative. So let's go over here. Okay? So I'm going to write in a different color just because I wrote that over there, and now I'm going to continue this problem. So there's going to be a positive and there's also going to be a negative. Now be careful here. I have students that won't write the parentheses. And if you don't write the parentheses, then you're not taking the inverse of the whole side. You're only doing negative 6x, and the poor negative 3 gets left out of the party. So that's it. We have the positive and we have the negative of this. And that's all they wanted to do. They said do not solve. We'll do that a little bit later. So let's move it down here. It says, decide whether the given number is a solution of the equation. Well, they're telling us that x equals 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to substitute it in. Okay, so where I see the x here, I'm going to substitute in a 2. So 2, substituting in 2, minus 9. And we want to know, does it equal 5? I tend to put a little question mark there because I'm checking it, so I don't know if it equals 5. So that helps me realize that I am checking something here. So we probably do this in our head. 4 minus 9, the absolute value of that, does it equal 5? Does the absolute value of negative 5 equal 5? Yes. Okay, because it's always positive. So yes, x equals 2 is a solution to that absolute value equation. Over here, same thing. Going to substitute in the negative 3. So 4, substituting in the negative 3. And we want to know, does that equal negative 5? Well, let's work it out. So we have negative 12 plus 7. Does that absolute value equal negative 5? Does the absolute value of negative 5 equal negative 5? No, does not. Okay, the absolute value of negative 5 is positive 5, because we said the absolute value of anything is always positive. So that's why this doesn't work. It's not a solution. So let's move it down. Can an absolute value equation equal a negative number like in example B? Explain. So some of you are kind of quick at this, and I really wasn't in school. I'd work it all the way out. But some of you can see this right away. Look at this equation. The absolute value of something equals a negative. Does that ever happen? No. The absolute value of something is going to always equal a positive. So we're going to explain that here. Can an absolute value equation equal a negative number like example B? Explain. No. Because the absolute value is always positive. And that's an okay answer. Let's say why. It's always positive because, we talked about at the top, because absolute value is the distance away from 0 on a number line. Remember, if I'm ever going too fast for you or you want to try the problem right beforehand, you can always pause me, you can always rewind it, and just do whatever you need to do to suit this to your needs. And we're going to have some pausing here in just a moment. Okay, let's move it down. Solve the equation. So let's look at this one right here. So absolute value, correct? So when we see absolute value, we want to think the positive and we want to think the negative. So we have 9 minus 3n equals 15, and then we'll have the negative of this. 9 minus 3n equals 15. I'm sorry, negative 9 minus 3n equals 15. Let's go ahead and subtract 9. 15 minus 9 would be 6. Divide by negative 3, and we have negative 2. Over here, I like to divide both sides by negative 1. Now, you can distribute it. It's not incorrect to do that. It's just quicker to get rid of our negative by dividing both sides by it first. So then negative 15, we're going to subtract the 9 from both sides, and we'll have negative 24. Divide by negative 3, and we'll have 8. And there are two solutions. So remember, you always have the positive, and you always have the negative. So let's go ahead and talk about B. So absolute value has to be the positive and the negative, and it's going to equal 0. So let's think about positive and our negative. So 1/2 W minus 1 equals 0, and the negative of that, 1/2 W minus 1 equals 0. Now over here, if I add 1 to both sides, I have 1/2 W equals 1. And then I'm going to multiply both sides by 2 because that's the reciprocal of 1/2. So if I multiply both sides by 2, like this, then you're going to have 2 over here. Now over here, you would divide both sides by a negative 1. If you want to do it the quick way, you can distribute if you want. And you have 1/2 W minus 1 equals, well, this is still 0. Now let's pause here for a moment. Look at the problem we just did, and look at where we are right now. Won't this give us the exact same answer? It will. So I'm not even going to finish working this out because we already know that it's going to be 2. And think about it. Since there's no positive or negative 0, since 0 is a nice neutral number, we don't have to worry about having 2 of these. Now, if you were like me in high school, I totally did not notice the 0, and I totally would work both out. And if you do, you'll just notice that you end up getting the same number. And when you get the same number, just box the one that you have there. You don't need to box both. So when you have it equal to 0, you'll only have one solution. Let's move down to this last one. What I'm going to do here is pause the video, and I'm going to work out the problem. So you are to pause it. You work out the problem. When you're done with the problem, unpause this video and see if you got the same answer that I got. So pause it right now. And boom, there's all my work. Now you're probably like, she just did a whole lot of stuff there. So let me explain what happened. I set up the positive version and I set up the negative version and I solved. And I think most of you can do that. But here's the problem. When we don't check our answers, sometimes we write down the wrong answer. Look, I checked it. When I substitute these two values in, first I did negative 104. The absolute value of negative 21 is not equal to negative 21 because absolute value is always positive. And the same with the 64. When I substituted it in over here and worked it out, the absolute value of 21 is not negative 21 because the absolute value of something is always positive. So you might want to check your answers if you're like me and you tend to just go for the problem and start working it out. Now, some of you actually noticed this, I'm sure, and you realized that absolute value cannot equal a negative. And as soon as you know this, or in this case, if you went through all this work like I did, you will find out that this problem actually has no solution. Now, some of you are probably scrambling, trying to write down everything I have on the screen. Just pause this video and then write it down. I'd rather you hear my words and pause the video and write it down later than trying to write it down while I'm talking. If you have any questions, make sure you bring them to class tomorrow. I hope that you enjoyed the Solving Absolute Value Equations video. Can't wait to see you then. Bye-bye.